Hear me, Quincy Harker. If you wish to see your daughter alive again, then follow me to the house that screams. I'm Eddie Webb.
And I'm Chris Fivey.
And today we do Tomb of Dracula, issue 12, here on Speechless. I am looking forward to today's discussion because right before recording, Chris just looked at me and said, "This comic."
It's true. The cover says everything you need to know about the entire issue, and it's beautiful.
And that's pretty much that long-ish bit is all on the cover because again, we're deep in the era of there's an entire comic panel on the cover of the comic.
They don't do this anymore. I wish
know.
they would. But,
I miss the days when I mean, heck, there were times where the cover of the comic was actually literally the first panel of the story. You know, we're past that to a degree, but yeah, I'm with you. I missed the part where like the cover actually, was a bit of the story, or hell, had anything to do with the interior of the comic. That's a passing fad these days too.
Sorry. Before we get into it, did you want to give the credits for the genius piece of work that we're about to delve into?
I was just gonna remark that after last issue, we're back to the actual ongoing plot. I mentioned before that this is around the time where the comic's starting to get a little serialized, and now that serialization seems to be kicking in. I have read these before, but it's been so long I've forgotten where it goes. So I think it continues on from this point, but I'm not 100% certain. But yes, this was released June 19th, 1973. Writer and penciler were again Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan. Inker is Tom Palmer, colorist is Petra Goldberg, letterer is John Costanza, and the editor is Roy Thomas. And the cover does have Dracula. Huh?
What I'm getting from you then is you're reading this when it first dropped in 1973, correct?
I wasn't born yet, so that would have been a very impressive feat on my part. I'm not quite that big of a comic book fan.
I was just saying that's probably why you don't remember what happened, is because you read it when you were so young.
Oh, I see. No, actually, to be fair, I actually did not become a Tomb of Dracula fan until about 15 years ago, where a friend of mine at White Wolf told me about the comic, and I started reading it then. So it was something that it was hey, you're a vampire fan, you should check this out. And I read it and was like, oh, this is really great for probably the wrong reasons that you think I should be reading it for, but this is great.
Is this because at the time, that's when you used to dress like Dracula and roam the halls going, blah, blah, I want to suck your blood? No?
It's true. That's why I still have the goatee today, is because, of all that.
I was going to make a Dracula joke somewhere in here that wasn't related to the comic.
I mean, I'm surprised. If we only keep it to one episode, I'll actually be genuinely shocked.
Trying to put a stake in my heart.
Yeah, see how I acknowledged it, but also subtly challenged you? See how that worked?
But you were saying something more pertinent than my...
well, just that the cover is Dracula grabbing a woman and changing into a bat, while Drake, Quincy, and Van Helsing are on the ground looking up at him. And immediately, the hair colors between the woman who was grabbed, who's supposed to be Quincy's daughter, and Van Helsing, who was very clearly the one on the ground, their hair colors are swapped. So already you can tell that maybe Petra Goldberg is perhaps rushed onto this project and may not be as steep in the nuances of this story.
Well, or it could be that if we're looking at the cover in detail, if she had red hair versus the red in Dracula's cape, we may have lost her in the image.
Well, she actually, she's supposed to have brown hair, but yes, I mean, I guess I can see that. I mean, it's just a fair point. Like, I mentioned before that this is still an era of coloring as aesthetic. I mean, like the house onto the side of it, one left side has a green gutter and a red face, while the right side is just all brown. So like these are obviously not meant to be the actual colors of the houses. They're meant to be kind of a visual aesthetic. But it's weird that the rest of the characters are colored more or less naturalistically, except for the Swatira color. But it's a fair point.
Are you saying you don't want to live in that red and green house and it be Christmas every day?
Especially because like there's like the brown roof, but the green gutter and the red window. Actually, the window itself is red except for the blue glass. It's and the green floor. Actually, if you look inside, the inside is all green. So
This is how I envision it, though. Whenever I think of anywhere in Europe, is based purely on this comic that we're reading
right,
right now, going
right,
forward.
exactly.
When I
Just like
show
on
up
the
and it
first
doesn't look
page.
like this, I'll be upset.
Well, I'm saying like the first page, for example, is like when we actually have a street scene and everything is colored in purple. So that's exactly how streets in London look.
So we could leave the cover and move to the first page. You seem like you
Well,
want to move on instead of then getting into the brick detail of that yellowish roof on the other side.
you'll
Okay.
spend the entire hour just talking about the house detail on this cover.
That's how much I like that cover. It tells a good story. I don't need to read the rest of the comic now.
I mean, yeah, to be fair, some of the covers that we've covered so far have been just functional, but I actually agree. This is I would have this as a poster kind of like cover. It's actually a really good cover. Um, the front splash page a bit less so, um, because we now have a different street scene where we have most of that same cast. Uh, are surrounding Dracula, who's in the middle of feeding off of Elizabeth Langley, who is a character that, as far as I know, just appears for this purpose as a comic, and then we never see again. She's just random victim.
But what a great name.
Elizabeth Langley, yeah.
LL. Because she'll probably go
Except
by
for
Liz.
yeah, I'll say because of the E, but yes,
It's the old
it
thing.
sounds alliterative without you being alliterative.
I think Stan Lee was walking by and said, "You need to make it just like Peter Parker or Reed Richards so people will acknowledge it." And they're like, "Okay, Stan." This is my headcanon that I'm telling you right now.
Dracula Drake.
Yep. No one appreciates this. Oh, brilliance, I notice.
So basically, the supporting cast that we've been slowly building up um, has managed to trap Dracula on the street. So like that whole last issue, um, where Quincy and Dracula, are like uh, we part and we meet again. We will fight, and for now we are at peace. That lasted basically one page. So now they're right back into fighting each other.
This is a great fight scene, though, because it's all right. I haven't read these. Like I said, I haven't read these before. I think you've read them and you've read up to this point. I jumped in directly at issue 10
Mhm.
to see them actually try to fight Dracula and effectively, even in the next scene where she's sort of shooting the crossbow at him and he goes through it like it's missed and then sort of takes it away from her like it's a toy. That is something I haven't seen, and I like it. I like that combat scene flow a lot. It's the next one where we get the new character. Is it Taji?
Taj,
Taj
yes.
jumps on him and sort of holds him regardless of how he's flying, which Blade tried, but Blade couldn't do. So it's interesting to see that Taj's grip is so strong that Dracula can't escape it. Like these panels are why I made that joke at the start. I love this flow of combat. Mortals versus a vastly superior supernatural.
So certainly, some of the earlier issues, like the first handful, were more about like Drake kind of coming to terms with things, so it doesn't not was as good. The action does start kicking when Van Helsing and Quincy start to show up. Um, so I mean, this is pretty indicative, but this is one of the first times in the comics run where it just more or less starts off with action like this. The book is now confident enough. You're right to kind of just say, okay, this is a comic about a vampire versus vampire hunter. So let's start with exactly that premise. He's feeding off someone, whoever, whatever, doesn't matter. They find him in the street. Let's just get to the fight. So Marv Wolfman's getting a little more confidence with the book. I do need to stop, take a breath, talk about Taj. Taj
Mhm.
is a mute, man of color, strongman. We've talked about this archetype before.
Doctor
He's
Who,
Indian,
in
not
fact.
black. I guess that's the only big difference we have here.
Goes all the way back to a conversation we had during the Doctor Who run with Tomb of the Cybermen.
Yep, I was exactly thinking too. So I'm going to read this. And I was just like, we have to talk about Tomb of Cybermen again because everything is Doctor Who.
So Eddie, what happened during that Doctor Who episode in here?
Well, people should go back and listen to that episode so they can find out.
See, that's journalist, though, and this it's speechless. So Eddie,
It's
what happened?
no, no, I'm not. I'm not being put into your trap. um, no, Taj is basically Elizabeth Van Helsing's bodyguard. Um, which is weird because as you can see from the first few panels, Elizabeth's pretty good at handling herself. So why she needs a bodyguard is kind of weird. Um, over time, though, what pretty quickly happens is that Taj more or less becomes Quincy's helper, which makes more sense. Is that the disabled man who can't necessarily be in the action scenes the same way, having another character who can participate in his actions, those physical action scenes, makes more sense character wise. It's not like there's no place for Taj in this dynamic. It's just he is a very unfortunate stereotype that absolutely does not get redeemed. Oh well, there's one point where I think it's going to get worse and does get not as bad as I hoped it would or as I feared it would. So
Mm.
I'll talk about that
Uh,
when we get there.
yeah, I'm in agreement with you about the stereotype. At the same time, I will point out that they brought in a character of color, even though they weren't able to use him and implement him properly.
Um, we do unfortunately.
Um,
You pointed this
before
out
we move
before.
on,
It goes, yeah.
hearing you describe what eventually happens to Taj and makes me almost now see both him and Quincy as a Bond villain because the Bond villain usually has a more capable assistant that does a lot of the physical stuff for them.
Yeah, now that you say that, and of course, Bond villains do have a fair amount of coding of disability as evil, so that also
Hmm.
tracks.
And if Dracula is our protagonist, so they would be his villains. That is just an interesting thing that occurred to me because Dracula essentially becomes our Bond, a solo act with a bunch of great skills fighting against the other people.
That's an interesting way of putting it. It's very much a kind of morality flipped, but the dynamics are still there.
So I'm curious if any of this actually has any linkage or inspiration back from Bond, given when it was written and how popular Bond would have been.
I would not be surprised because, as far as I know, all the people working on this comic are American, and they're probably writing this through the lens of British cinema, which in the 70s is probably primarily Bond films, in a lot of the same way that Master of Kung Fu is probably written through purely through watching Chinese and Hong Kong cinema instead of actually, working with people of color to find out actual things. So I mean, it's very much kind of a Britsploitation ish approach.
Yeah. Because hearing us talk about this now really makes me think that it's a mix of Bond and House of Horror. And this issue, having read it, plays up to that, both of those aspects of it.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I did just want to note that we have gone back to the unfortunate gray skin color for Taj. So that we talked before how you were surprised that they actually used a different skin tone, and now they've reverted back. So we're still kind of in a flux state of that.
So we're not there yet, but I'm also curious if they did that because, spoiler, you should have read the issue though, Blade shows up. So I wonder if they wanted to delineate those two by
Maybe,
doing that.
maybe,
I'm not just trying to think of reasons why I'm not trying to give them excuses.
maybe it may be a case of they couldn't get the you're right the Indian skin tone across, and as much as it is frustrating and as much as it is a genuine problem, we do have to recognize that comics this period still do have a relatively limited color palette. They're basically, from a production standpoint, what they do is they actually have different plates, color plates they put when they print the comics. One for red, green, and blue. And literally, what it does, the plate is carved to block out which color they don't want on the page. So every color has to be some percentage of red, green, or blue.
Hmm.
That's why occasionally in older comics, if you see it looks like one page is miscolored, it's probably because one of the plates got swapped.
Is that also
So
why the Hulk changed colors from gray to green?
No, actually, that was because the gray color wasn't showing up on the pulp paper very well, and so changed it to green just because it wasn't showing up. But nice shout out to history. I believe that. Anyway, so this is the part where next page is the part where I thought it was going to go bad and it didn't. Where actually, I'm sorry, no, it's not this page. It's a bit later, different Taj scene. But Taj is being a badass. I'm like, no, let him go. He's turning into a bat, and Taj's like, no, I will just take this guy, even though he's a bat. And there's a cool scene where like because the bat is weighs so much less, they both fall, and Taj is still holding on to Dracula as bat because he weighs more.
And all right, so we've said some other, pointed out some of the stereotypical aspects of Taj, but this also shows Taj to be an incredible figure. He literally wrestled Dracula back down onto
Yeah.
the ground.
Hmm.
Dracula's so concerned he couldn't turn to mist how he's done before with Blade. He couldn't shrink to a smaller bat how he did with other people. So that is an impressive feat they gave to a character of
Right.
color
Yes.
in this comic from the 70s.
Right. And so, I mean, from that perspective, we are going to see spoiler for the rest of the issue, but we're going to see two characters of color who are both extremely competent in a relatively mainstream Marvel comic in 1973.
And they didn't kill Taj when they fell to the ground, which is what I
Yeah.
was expecting to happen as I was reading this. It's like, fuck, you're going to kill this guy, aren't you? And they
Yeah.
didn't.
No, Taj goes on for a bit. um, so Dracula says, fuck this, and grabs, I keep forgetting her name,
Edith.
but it's Quincy's
Edith.
daughter. Edith, thank you. And she grabs her daughter and takes off with her. Briefly, Drake tries to stop him. Drake is not the fighter of the group, and so he gets slapped down. And that's just one thing I do like about this comic is that the way the comic is framed. Nathan Drake. I keep saying Nathan Drake. Not. Drake is the first character we see in the very first issue of the comic, and he's the Descendant of Dracula. So a lot of the initial framing is like this is the protagonist, but as we talked about, Dracula is actually the protagonist. So Drake doesn't, in this early run, really become any better. Like all the supporting cast are in some way objectively better than Drake. It's interesting because like he Van Helsing, Quincy, Taj, everyone else has made some meaningful act on Dracula. Drake just gets slapped the fuck down, and I actually like that.
So do I. I'm not going to lie. But it also makes sense for the character of Drake. You said that he was someone that sort of inherited the castle and everything else and came to the picture versus all of these people who are established hunters with skills.
Right, right, and it would have been typical of the comics at the time for the central white male leads to just suddenly become more competent. Maybe he has an issue where he trains and suddenly he's just better than everyone else. But that just we're now 12 issues in, and that just consistently hasn't happened.
Because he hasn't had the vital, as you were saying, montage yet. Because we all know that you've got to have a montage
Gotta have a montage. Yes.
to get better.
Uh,
I do like his line though. Like relative, don't you can't stop me once again pointing out that I am related to Dracula, but you get Dracula's sweet burn about like, don't tell me that you're related to me. It boils my blood.
yes. Also, as much as I love Marv Wolfman, he's very much channeling kind of gothic novels with this. And so when Dracula talks like that, it makes perfect sense. But when Drake, who's supposed to be a modern hip 70s dude, says, "That's it, ancestor mine. I've taken as many of your stinking ultimatums as I'm going to." And it's just like, which is it Ben Grimm? Like your ancestor mine is such a weird phrase in the middle of this otherwise jargony ejaculation. It's just so okay, but I get it. He's trying to channel that kind of gothic feel.
I'm going to start dropping that in everyday talk, in everyday speech now, when I go along. I don't know how I'm going to put it in ancestor mind, but I'm going to find a way to do it in just random conversations.
I'm gonna teach your kids to start calling you that. You can't say in my room, ancestor mine.
And So for Dracula, it's nice to constantly see him calling Quincy his friend throughout this entire thing. Like, I'm
Yes,
kicking all of your asses. I'm gonna steal your daughter, my friend, my friend, my friend.
because ultimately, for all of this, Dracula sees Quincy as the only one that's worth his time, which again is interesting. Like you said, um, we have Taj gets his hero moments. Van Helsing, she doesn't actually nail Dracula, but she gets her crossbow out quickly, and only because he changes the mist so suddenly does she not hit him. But she gets her moment, and then because Dracula's talking to Quincy, even though Quincy is not directly in this fight, he still gets his moment of like Dracula still sees him as a threat, even though he's in a wheelchair. So again, like it's for a Marvel's 1970s comic, it actually is surprisingly diverse and does a pretty good job of highlighting its diverse cast.
And it goes back to the thing though, is if all right, I know that you've said that it's now starting to get back up on its feet and people are starting to pay
Mm.
attention to it. But at the time it still wasn't being paid a lot of attention to, if I remember right. So
No.
it's again a horror, something with horror, being able to show a diverse and slightly more progressive movement than more mainstream things because they don't have eyes
Hmm.
on them yet. I'm curious when people start acknowledging it and it becomes more popular if it keeps up with that same progressive movement and diversity.
We'll have to see. Well, because we're doing this for another 6 years now.
Because my exact callback for this for journalists is going to be that we talked about the same thing with Sleepy Hollow. That first season of Sleepy Hollow was exceptional. It was progressive, it was diverse because no one was paying attention to it.
Right, and then it became popular, and then it got meddled with.
Yeah.
Okay. So Dracula basically says, tomorrow at midnight, I'll tell you where to find your daughter. You have to come find me because Dracula can't just kill his daughter. He's got to make a big fucking deal about it because Dracula's extra. We've talked about this. And so he grabs her and takes off. Whoosh.
What this does tell me is that I am a man of a certain size that enjoys to drink a good stout. So I feel comfortable to know that Dracula cannot just take me and fly off in the air with me. I feel good to know that, Eddie, because we see that he can't fly off with Taj because Taj is too large, but Taj put the death grip on him. I could probably not put the death grip on Dracula, but my love of beer has saved me from being taken away to the House of Screams.
See that's what you have to tell people is like going, no, no, I'm not putting on weight. I'm still protecting myself from Dracula and the House of Screams. Mm.
It's a Dracula shield.
Dracula's shield, right? Exactly. So Quincy starts to break down because correctly, he's like, I've been worried about this moment ever since she was born, ever since her mother died, was that Dracula would use her against me. Dracula knows how much she means to me, which does raise the question of why has Dracula never thought of this before now? But whatever. It's because all that happened before the issue of the comic started, so that's why. And this is
Honestly,
where oh, go ahead.
if we think about it from the Dracula's perspective, he's been alive for centuries now.
Mhm.
We make a joke about him being extra, which he is, but come on, if you're alive for centuries, you're bored most of the time. It's not like Dracula goes home and watches TV. So he needs these elaborate plots, and maybe he did think about this like a decade ago. Oh, like a little notebook, Dracula notebook, plans to fuck up with Quincy, kidnap his daughter, and that's like 86 on his list of things to fuck with Quincy.
Which, but in context of the previous issue, then is even funnier because it's like, I have a plan to capture Quincy's daughter. I should get to that, but before that, I need to fuck with this biker gang. That's
Yes,
higher on my to-do list.
it is a vampire to-do list, and he goes through it methodically. I bet if they stole that book, Dracula would be fucked for like a year having to rewrite everything.
Oh yeah, we all know the pain of losing a draft and what that feels like.
That's my headcanon. You're welcome.
um. So Dracula takes her to the mortuary, and basically says, you're a lore, and basically comes out that I'm tired of being hunted down because he's been pretty much on the defensive for the past few issues. Pretty much ever since the Blade went after him, Dracula's been on the back foot pretty much ever since then. So he's like, I'm tired of this. I'm going to turn the tables. Um, and so I'm going to lure them to a place of my settings that I can take them out. Ha ha ha. Literally Ha 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 ha. Like big super huge, like big huge letters take up like a quarter of the panel he's in.
That didn't sound right. I think it's more like ha 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 is more of how it should be in ha ha ha.
Hang on.
There you go. That's perfect. So that's it for the next 20 minutes. It's just going to be us laughing back and forth to see which one we like better.
I once in a LARP played a Malkavian character who thought he was a actor who played Dracula. I did not last very long.
Oh, that's I like that.
Try to explain to Avenger, no, it's just a movie. It's like that's exactly the point. That's exactly the problem. Anyway,
You've opened this door
so
now. So on the Speechless podcast, during the middle of the Tomb of Dracula run, what is your favorite clan of vampire from Vampire the Masquerade 2.0?
Baron.
Why?
I've always been attracted to the rebelliousness and the struggle to keep my anger in check.
Nice.
I get asked this question a lot, you know.
Well, of course, because you're the Eddie Webb with an established career as a vampire
Uh,
writer, world builder, creator. There's like a whole litany of things I could go and say that
Next
are true to boost
page.
your ego. But instead, I stake that in the heart.
The crew drive through the ring because, of course, it's raining. Um, and between
Do
pages,
we
basically
know?
a day is. Yep.
Do we know if this is one of the parts where Dracula can possibly influence weather? Because there's some stories where vampires can influence or control the weather,
Um,
and I don't know if
I
that's happened in the
bel
comic.
I believe he can, but I don't think it's happened here. I think it's much later when the X-Men run comes because he starts to, and then Storm fucks him up, and I think it's one of the reasons why Dracula then starts to fall for Storm.
Okay, because I wasn't sure if that was something that happened in the issues before you started reading, which could have then been
No, no, no,
inferred
no.
here.
No, no, no.
Okay,
I think it's something. Yeah, right. I think it's something that's chronically in the book. I think it's being implied here, but I don't think he actually directly has that powers yet.
okay,
Um, but basically, Dracula apparently between panels has given them the location, and so they've driven to the house, and it is just a blur of like color. I actually kind of like it, even though it's very minimalistic in terms of drawing and inking. Um, you could barely see the house, and then the actual characters are just a blot of orange against the blue rain and the purple car. Very impressionistic coloring, but the whole page has a washed out look to it to kind of sell the fact that it's raining. So it's I've been giving the coloring some dinging, but in this case, I actually really like it because the whole page, how the color is used, really sells the fact that this is a torrential downpour.
yeah, I'd like to have that piece because that's a good piece
Mhm.
of art.
But you think they're going to step into the house, but no, because we have to cut to Blade.
Yeah, baby, yeah.
Blade with uh, his friend. I actually don't know what the relationship is here. uh,
This is the most Shaft moment
it is.
that I
It
could think of.
absolutely is.
Like
Saffron.
I'm curious. I don't remember now when Shaft dropped. I think it might have been 73, so it might have been too close for it to have done it. But this literally is a scene from the movie. Do you remember this scene? Because we
Yes,
watched
yes.
the
No, I
movie.
remember seeing it.
And
Like
it's
he literally shows up to the woman's house, has sex with her, picks up the phone, says later, baby, and leaves. That's pretty much the whole scene.
yeah. So Shaft had to have come out. They had to have seen it and go, oh yeah.
Yes, and sure enough, that's basically what happens. Is like, of course, I mean, in Marvel, they just kiss before the phone rings. Um, and then he's like, "No, sorry, Dracula has taunted me to come fight him, so I have to pass up sexy times to go fight Dracula because I am a dedicated hunter." And she
And
throws a knife at him as he leaves, which
um,
I have so many questions about Saffron now. Actually,
now I want to go back and rewatch a couple of scenes from Shaft to see how much it directly parallels it. But since we're here, I also want to point out that when we're looking here at the different color palettes for their skin tones, all three people of color in this issue have different skin tones.
that is a good point.
I
Actually,
I can't stress how fucking phenomenal that is.
no, that's just really good.
they had limited palettes, how you've already talked about, and they were able
Mhm.
to pull that off. So while I have some question issues how they did Taj's, it makes sense now in context of a larger for the larger issue itself.
Actually, it's interesting now that you say that, because the panels where Saffron and Blade are on this are in the same panel. Um, Basically, all of their skin gradation is just basically ink wash. It's the color plus black the gradation. But there's one scene where it's a close up on Shaft where he's on the phone, and he actually has a purple and a gray sheet across it to kind of show more differentiation. But Saffron's not in there to muddy that aesthetic.
I think you said when Shaft was using the phone, by the way.
Yeah, it is Shaft. I mean, let's be honest. When Blade's using the phone, I did say Shaft.
So,
Just
having
just
made
talk
the
about
comments
Blade.
earlier about Taj on the page, this is why I didn't have as much of an issue when we were there. Because
Yeah,
I read through the comic. When I first saw it, I did, but then I saw this part and I was like, oh, that's probably what they
right.
were thinking, which shows a deliberate choice and giving respect as much as they could within the confines of what they had to do it.
Right.
And if Blade is our primary character, because we saw Blade before we saw Taj, so that's at least my point of reference, is why
Mhm.
Blade appears to be less a black character with, in my opinion, the best palette color they could give him.
Yeah. No, that I agree. Uh, so we go back to the house that screams. Although it's not called that yet.
Ah!
Not called that yet. And Frank Drake, if I didn't remember his first name, they start exploring on, but the lights come on, and then again, like everything when they first step in is kind of in blues and light greens and whatnot. And then when he turns, when the lights come on, all of a sudden, the whole all the panels are just washed out in yellow, and it's a really and it's Dracula basically turned the lights on, and then suddenly he shuts them back off, and so again, the one panel it's almost entirely in black. So it's a nice way of using the color to kind of sell us. There's almost nothing in those panels except for like a couple of candles, people cowering. It's very minimalistic, but it really gets across the whole aesthetic very, very well.
And then it's interesting, they've implied that the lights are brighter than normal because they're saying close your eyes for the light burns them out.
Hmm.
So that has to be more than the candles, which is implied, but not anything visually there, how you're saying, to see that.
Um, I will note that there is um, Frank Drake is saying, "Wait for Dracula to make his." He trails off, and then there's a blue box that says "Move." Frank Drake? Question mark. That is a different narration box from the other narration boxes we've had. Put a note in that. I'll come back to that. All the other narration boxes have been orange or yellow, and have been pretty straightforward third person narration. That blue one is different. Uh, but lights go out, so they start to use lighters to set torches because, of course, there are torches in this old house. Um, Dracula is taunting them from the shadows upstairs, and so um, they're trying. They're trying to find out where she is. Come upstairs and find out. I have to claim her.
If I was
And of course,
Dracula, I too would have had torches, but I would have booby trapped my torches.
right, yeah.
Just
It's like if you're gonna do booby traps, go all the way out.
yeah. If you're gonna pull an arcade, be arcade.
But it turns out that the stairs are kind of rotten through. So uh, Van Helsing, she actually steps through one. Frank tries to pull her leg out while Dracula unleashes a whole bunch of bats that are clawing at her face. But Taj has already got a flaming torch, so he's using it to kind of swap the bats away to get closer to Rachel. And also uses, I think it's a garbage can lid or a pot lid,
I think
and
it's a
just literally.
shield from a knight
Oh, is
because
it actual night shield? Okay.
that looks like a knight in the shadow there, like a suit of armor.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. I see it now. And he literally just starts slapping bats out of the air with it. But this
That
is the
is a
part where
beautiful
I was
scene,
worried it
though.
was.
Like just from you seeing the back of Taj, like a torch, flaming torch in one hand, shield in the other, and just like the long flowing green coat that almost looks more like a cloak than a coat.
Mhm. Yeah,
This
I
lifeless
love his
Seneca.
green coat. But this is the part where I was worried for a panel, um, uh, because one panel is like, someone claim his devotion is truly love for the blonde vampire huntress, and they would be right. And I'm like, oh no, please don't do this. But the next panel is like, but it's not the love that lovers hold, rather it's the love that one feels for the truest of friends, the most loyal of comrades. And I like that because I was really worried it's going to be, oh no, it's going to be a Taj, Rachel, Frank Drake love triangle, and it's like, oh please don't do that. But no, it's just Taj is just a good friend because Rachel saved his life once. That's why he's her defender, and that's something that it's mentioned in like a couple of panels in an issue, several issues back. So it's not, we don't see that. It's not a well known thing, but reading that reminded me, yes, the reason why he is her defender is that she actually saved his life once, and that's the reason why he's such a loyal vampire hunter now.
Which, if it's not mentioned that much, probably made it easier to transition him then to being Quincy's
Right.
right hand.
Right. Mhm. And of course, Quincy tries to use a net, and that doesn't work out. So basically, out of all vampire hunters, Taj once again is the MVP. I have a net. I only got a few, and Rachel's trying to get out of the floorboard with Taj. She's like, I got a shield. Whap 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 whap. But Rachel and Frank Drake start to make their way up the stairs and start to threaten him if they've harmed Edith. And of course, Dracula is like, when you next see her, you also see the face of death. And again, big, huge laughter on the panel. He doesn't laugh normally. His laughter like breaks out of the word balloons and fills up the panel, which I love.
That's how powerful he is, and that's how you know it's his comic.
Rachel's face has been heavily scratched up by the bats, and Drake's like, "Your face," and she's like, "I don't care. We have to go after Edith." Um, and so Drake pulls a gun out and starts to go. Taj and him will go after Dracula, while
Is
she stays behind with Quincy.
up to this point, has there been anything at all that made guns relevant against Dracula in the previous issues that we haven't read?
No, and Frank Drake of all characters should know that guns are not going to be that useful against him.
Okay. I didn't know if there were suddenly, for some reason, he had how the Punisher occasionally has mercy bullets. He had wooden bullets that fired from his gun.
No, no,
Little wood
no,
tip bullets. Pew!
no. He just has a lure because again, Frank Drake is not the most competent character in this comic.
Oh,
I won't say he's the least because there are characters below him, but he's definitely of the support of the Vampire Hunter group. He's probably the worst. Um, and so, so they find Edith's handkerchief, and he's like, "Oh look, it's her monographed handkerchief. I have a feeling I'm going to a trap. So let's split up."
but he lays out his reasoning. I think it's a trap. We split up. One of us will probably live.
Right. And in a way, I kind of dig that. I mean, it's like I joke about Drake being incompetent, but like he's one thing he does not lack is courage. Um, he's almost suicidally stupid, but he is just absolutely a courageous person who will die for his friends. And so he's very much the, yeah, like one of us is gonna get back. And in my head, it's going, yeah, it's probably gonna be Tosh, buddy. Based on everything I've seen.
And funnily enough, the comic agrees with you, which is
Yes.
why we have Blade show up to help him.
Right. Because like Drake is one panel alone, and then he's like, I'm gonna sneak up on him, and Blade just slaps the gun out of his hand and said, I can hear you all the way in London. um
Oh, and that, all right. Do you like this Blade outfit or the more modern Blade outfit where he's sort of in all black?
so I think the modern Blade outfit ages better, right? Because like you can't look at his outfit and not go, this guy's from 1973, right? This is a very specific moment in history. But every time I see him in this outfit, I always smile because his outfit is amazing.
I feel the exact same way.
I wouldn't see him modern day, but if they ever did a Blade prequel movie where it's set in the 70s, he absolutely must wear this outfit. Green glasses and all.
Oh, love
Um,
it.
but anyway, so uh, Blade's basically like, "Hey, I'm gonna go hunt Dracula. If you want to come with me, it's cool, but otherwise, later, dude." Um, and so we see now that the narration panels are focused primarily on Frank, you notice there's a shift. You find yourself, Frank Drake, muttering, "Yeah, we're joining almost half convincingly," as the sound of your voice drowns out the almost improbable click of a metal spring. It suddenly shifts to second person. And that's something that this comic has done very inconsistently, but I think does more consistently during this run, during Wolfman's run, is that Marvel at this point was playing with the whoever is the quote unquote protagonist, as we talked about before. That's muddy for this comic, but go with me. Whoever is the protagonist of the issue, the dialogue boxes actually are written in second person. The best examination and discussion of this is probably from Jacob Miles' Explain the X-Men, where they call this the angry Claremontian narrator. Where at one point in time, literally the narrator starts shouting at Scott Summers. Um, so Claremont certainly took this and ran with that ball a lot longer. But there was this moment in time, it was about I'd say 72-ish to 75-ish, where Marvel's playing with the second person narration a lot more frequently. We almost never see it before or after. It's just I can always tell about when a comic is if I see the shift to second person.
Do you like this angry narrator?
I kind of do, especially in a horror comic, honestly, because it is a more efficient way to express internal horror. Right? It's a very shouty, blunt way of doing it. But for the time period, because like later on, the spring is there's a trap with little spiders that climb out, and the spiders are climbing up, and so it's like it's talking about them scaring, and it says, and they move Frank Drake directly towards your leg, and so by talking to Frank Drake, it's really trying to sell that like this is scary for him specifically. The other characters are a little more cool and professional, but Frank Drake, who doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, is actually terrified.
Do you like it in the X-Men then? Because that's not a X-Men generally not a horror comic.
Well, I do because that's more of the at least in the times and the kind of comics that were being written are more the internal angst, right? If I remember correctly, a lot of it was generally directed at Cyclops. Cyclops is kind of the center of the you are the center of a drama of the X Men. So when it comes to those dramatic moments, then it tends to. In this case, the drama and the horror are overlapping, so it makes sense to kind of do that kind of Hammer House, "Look behind you" kind of stuff, and you're not really talking to the audience, you're talking to Frank Drake, but since we're supposed to be identifying with him, that's it makes sense that we're kind of using the second person, the "you," as a way to kind of get the reader to sympathize with Frank Drake more. It's an interesting technique. I can see why they stopped using it, but it's an interesting technique.
Um, I know here in the text it said a trap springs open, but if you look at it, that is literally Dracula kneeling with a
Yes,
cage of spiders letting loose. That is how petty Dracula is. He waited here to fuck with Dracula. Could have attacked them both, caught him off guard, potentially
spiders.
killed them. Instead, released spiders just to fuck with Drake.
Right.
Hand release them.
Right. Meanwhile, Taj has actually done his job and found Edith. And Taj is like, "Oh, hey, they're screaming. I'm going to follow the screaming. Oh, look, I found Edith. Job done." Except it's not quite what happens.
No.
Because Dracula, after obviously letting the spiders loose, rushes over to clock Taj in the back of the head.
Well, he has celerity, so he can make that distance.
Right, exactly. He's run across. Um, and the narrative emphasizes that he's moving extremely silently, but Dracula can still hear him regardless, which makes Blade's comment about Drake even more relevant. Is like a trained vampire hunter learns to walk very quietly because vampires have very good hearing. Frank Drake is not a trained vampire hunter. There's a lot of implicit world building that actually happens here, which I quite like. Um, But no, Dracula smacks him because he hears him, knocks him out, tells Edith no one's going to save you, and then we cut back to Drake and Blade, where Blade has seen the spiders that Drake has completely missed. He's like, "Don't move a muscle," and Drake and Blade actually waits for the spiders to all climb onto the carpet, and then gangs up and throws it out the window.
All right. So before I was thinking it was Bond related. This is a riff on Bond
Yes.
because there were the deadly tarantulas that were released to kill Bond. If anyone remembers that from an early show, was that like Doctor No when that happened? They sent tarantulas to kill Bond. So I am now 100% certain they were watching a Bond flick and went, "Ooh yeah," and
So
slapped.
by that logic, Frank Drake is Blade's Bond girl.
Yes,
I mean, I'm with it. I'm totally with you on that. But
I because if we go by Skyfall Bond, we've established it was an offline in there, but Bond would go both ways.
True.
Regardless, sexy time is sexy time. That's all that matters.
Right. After Blade dispatches the spiders, Eve screams because of Dracula threatening her. Blade hears that, and they both rush towards the room. And so Blade just literally, he doesn't even kick down the door. He literally just runs through the door, it seems, the way the panel's framed. Because the door is splintering under him as he's running, and he has both knives out. So it looks like he kind of just charged through the door.
Which goes back to the point. I think here Blade still doesn't have superpowers. He's just highly trained.
Right.
Eddie, could you break through a door just by running straight at it?
God, no. I bounce right the fuck off.
Or are we to imply, based on how weak the floorboards were, the doors are probably also very weak?
I think that's what's actually happening, is that the whole house is kind of rotting away. But
Okay.
I think it's one thing that, especially these older comics, I've gotten so used to the kind of decompressed story style we use now, where literally every action has to be shown on the page somewhere. And so a lot happens between panels. If you're not carefully reading, it can be a little confusing unless you're carefully paying attention to each panel, which is how these comics were originally designed to read. You're supposed to spend a lot of time reading these comics, not just flipping through. So you have to kind of think through, why is that? And it's like, oh, it's probably because of this.
Well, these are also longer than a modern day comic, which I love, especially given back then, as a kid with less money, to get a comic that would last you longer than 5 minutes is great.
Right. Brief digression of Van Helsing and Harker talking about, they're hearing all the screamings and they're worried about him. But then we go back to Dracula and Blade fighting, which is the reason we're here. Let's be honest. And Dracula references previous continuity. He's like, "You've killed a bunch of many of my legions. We've seen Blade kill 3. By this, we imply that this has been going on for some time. So Blade has been killing vampires or Dracula's minions for longer than just that one issue, issue 10. It chased them, hounded them, chased them, slaughtered them. When all they sought was to spread my rule to humans." It's just, I love it. It's like, you murdered all my people, and I just wanted to rule over humanity, you big meanie. So because Blade has the temerity to not be ruled by Dracula, he's going to die here, apparently. Um, but then Blade tries to turn the tables. Dracula manages to shove him over the balcony, which again splinters, which reinforces the whole place is kind of falling apart here.
Well, that would be harder to say because Dracula is, we've already established, superhumanly strong.
True. But and again, one thing I like about pacing time, it's hard to talk about in audio, and it's even hard to talk about sometimes when you're looking at it digitally. But um, the page turn is a very real pacing element of physical comics, and this panel, I'm almost positive, was on a right hand page. So the thing where Blade's going through and Dracula's talking about how he's going to fall to his death. you have to turn the page to see what happens. So it's a very mini cliffhanger, because the very next panel, Blade grabs a chandelier and manages to hang on, but you have like a second of what's going to happen to Blade there. So and that kind of pacing was very intentional. So if you actually look at physical comics, a lot of times scene changes or big moments will end on the bottom panel on the right page.
Hmm. That's a good tidbit. As a huge fan of more physical media, the thing that I will give digital media though is that they now have, depending on the app you use, you get panel by panel for reading, and that's nice.
Mhm.
That's how I read most of this comic, and I enjoyed it a lot better not knowing what the next panel was.
Yeah, and so I think the if you could, I'm not doing panel by panel. I'm doing just a full page view. But I think if you're doing panel by panel, you're right. You probably do get something close to that because you have to swipe to see what happens next, and so you get some of those moments, probably in a similar but not exactly the same way. But yes, while Blade recovers from the fight, Drake manages to grab an axe that's just conveniently lying around. And he's like, step back or I'll use this. And Dracula's like, go ahead, not gonna do anything about it. Um, and again, just like he's literally speeding up on Drake while he's talking. He's like, I who have withstood the tide of 500 years shall continue to exist till time itself runs dry, while you, my weak-kneed descendant, your time has ended now. She's like, that's a lot to say when you're beating the shit out of somebody.
So what Drake has, I don't think anyone else in this comic has, if I'm looking at it from a gaming perspective, is hit points. Drake has the most hit points or a super high toughness rating because everyone else is dodging or they're sort of getting glancing blows from Dracula. Dracula is straight up punching and smacking Drake all around repeatedly. So that's why Drake is in your team to take the hits while the rest of you do something productive.
So he's the tank.
Yeah.
um,
He
but
aggroes
despite
Dracula is what it is.
it does, yeah. It's like, attack me, attack me, attack me. Well, and actually, that works because that's what happens is that Dracula gets so wrapped up in Drake that Blade drops from behind onto his back, and Dracula's genuinely surprised by, Blade's like, I bet you forgot me. It's like, it's been 4 panels, but Dracula has absolutely forgotten Drake in the course of 4 panels.
Oh.
And so Blade kicks Dracula in the face.
And he
And
screams like, my face, my face.
yes. Yeah, and my other thing, like, Blade's saying, "I have a knife. I'm gonna stake you," and Dracula's like, "Yeah, but my face, man, that's not cool." um, and the text tries to get just Dracula flees, and it's like just a burning gash pulses red in hellborn agony, and the Lord of Darkness lashes out, tossing the powerful blade aside as a bothersome insect. So I mean, like, that kick really messed Dracula up, apparently. And so
Oh.
Dracula flees. He breaks through a window, turns into bat form, and flies away. And so they go to find Edith. She's upstairs, but it turns out Edith's been turned into a vampire.
Are we shocked? Is that what this was supposed to have been?
I think this is supposed to be a big twist, right? Even though he did this exact thing two issues ago. Uh,
Maybe if I was younger or I wasn't such a jaded reader, I would be shocked. But I was waiting
no,
for the scene.
I mean, in one respect, I mean, if you're younger, yes, but also if you think on it in real time, Edith's been a minor character, but a character we've known now for it would have been in real time about 6 months, maybe longer, and now she's a vampire. Every other time vampires happened, Um, it's been usually within the course of an issue, within the same issue, or maybe from one issue to the next. So this is a relatively long-running character who's now been turned into a vampire, and of course, it's Quincy's daughter, and he's a vampire hunter, and so he has to have the struggle of how do I deal with this? Um, and interestingly, like he doesn't want to believe it. He's like, tell me it's not true. And she's fighting it to her credit. She's like, I'm going to eat you. I'm going to drink your blood. Stop me, please. I can't help myself. And she tries to kill herself by throwing herself off the balcony. Um, but Drake points out she's not dead. And so Quincy's like, okay, then he takes the top off his cane, which has a stake, of course. And he's like, I'll take care of it. using nothing but the prescribed methods, which again, even for some reason you don't know what that is, 2 pages previously, Blade explained with his knife, this works like a stake, and if I stab you, you die. So the issue still quite cleverly sets you up for this moment so Quincy doesn't have to elucidate what he has to do. So he can have that quiet dread. And there's just a silent panel. It's shaded all in black, white, and red of her mouth open. We don't see what happens, but we can tell she's been killed. And then of course, Drake's like, "Run, run! We'll find you and we'll kill you." Um, because it's the drama of having to kill their friends. It's so utterly melodramatic, and it's wonderful. It's fantastic. There's no scenery unchewed in this worn house.
But then you get to go into like the title of the next issue, "Death of a Vampire," so you know it's gonna. This
Yes,
is the final issue. Is the next one because it's
right.
over. They'll kill Dracula.
Even though next issue's also one of the things I love about Marvel Comics is they'll tell you next issue, Death of a Vampire. Briefly moving ahead, the cover says Death of a Vampire, but the actual title of it is To Kill a Vampire. So, but yes, it's all kind of same things like, I will kill you. And then next one is Death of a Vampire. Okay, I guess maybe they killed Dracula. Maybe the comic's over on issue 13, which, given what we know, is that it was a relatively experimental comic. Issue 13 is kind of an unlucky number. They may have decided, you know what? That's it. Issue 13, we're ending this series. So it wouldn't have been implausible to go, maybe they do kill Dracula in issue 13. They don't. We know that, but now. But it wasn't as cut and dried, I think. So, Chris, you had said before that you liked issue 10, you did not like issue 11. Now here's issue 12. What do you think?
I like issue 12, but also it's pretty much a running combat slash horror riff, which are both things I enjoy. And I
Mhm,
like seeing normal people, I said at the start, fight against almost overwhelming odds. And
mhm,
Dracula as a threat is no overwhelming odd for a normal human. Put them in a Dracula death trap magnifies that. But at the same time, it's undercut because they bring in a highly proficient character I was not expecting as I was reading this issue, given last issue. And they brought
mhm,
Blade back in, which
mhm.
then leveled the playing field.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
like the constant shifts.
I do too. I like the fact that uh, because this is villain as protagonist, the villain has to constantly undercut himself because that's just the only way this has momentum. And so the comic's done a good job of establishing that Dracula just is almost pathologically addicted to dramatic gestures. So of course he's gonna wait till midnight. Of course he's gonna turn Harker's daughter. Of course he's gonna invite Blade because he can prove he's better than all of them. You know, so it's wonderful in that regard. And also, you're right. Like because this is real people, we do see real stakes here. I mean, yes, we all kind of saw it a mile away. Eventually, the minor character is going to get turned to a vampire, but it still is done with a fair amount of heartbreak, even though it's only 1 page, really, of consequence. And it does show that none of these characters are safe. If Dracula is the protagonist, none of these characters are safe, which does give a certain amount of, which really works for a horror comic, because a horror comic with an ongoing protagonist, the protagonist can't obviously die because otherwise we stop following them. But if the protagonist is the villain, then yeah, any of the characters you grow attached to could die. And so you do feel scared for them. And again, with the second person, the idea of intentionally tying our emotions to Frank Drake specifically, I think does a really good job of going, Drake might die at some point. We don't know. And that's not off the table.
Well, if we're going in the horror monster motif that the comic book writers and artists could have seen by then, they could have killed Dracula, and then it would have been Spawn of Dracula, like daughter of Dracula,
True. Yeah.
son of
True.
Dracula, Dracula's third cousin on his mother's side, Dracula,
I
something
mean,
like
because to be
that.
fair, the comic is called Tomb of Dracula, which means there could be other people in Dracula's tomb,
Yes,
like Grant.
and that's what a lot of the classic monster films did. They had like an offshoot of them because they would kill the monster, and then oh crap, they made a lot of money. We got to find a way to get more of that money.
Right. Right.
Sweet, sweet
Um,
capitalism.
are you looking forward to issue 13?
I am because I just cheated and I looked at the cover of issue 13, and I'm not going to talk about it here until we start that recording.
Yes, but there may be some characters we want to see again coming back.
And as this is pretty much now, I think, for at least for me, when I went into this, an exploration of Blade's history that I didn't know. I knew of it, but I didn't know it. I am loving this 70s version of Blade.
Mhm. Yes,
Although I do like my Blade with superpowers, I am enjoying this Shaft Blade.
right. I will note that since we're talking about that, there's been an interesting, I guess, debate about Blade, in the sense that this comic is not clear on this point, but later Marvel canon has clarified this. Is that because Blade has primarily tracked Dracula in London? Dracula's based in London the entire time he's been resurrected, and Blade's been tracking him since Dracula has been resurrected. Ergo, Blade is British. The movies did not go that direction, and most of the other supporting cast are American. And the comic is not written in uh, Claremontian style dialect, so we don't know for certain. But later comics do confirm that Blade is actually British. So not only do we have a black man who's a British black man who is a protagonist, and that's something else I think is very very cool.
That is cool. Hmm. I didn't know that part. I kind of like it,
Yep.
though. Never mind. I might talk about that later. Different idea.
If people wanted to talk to you about Blade, Chris, where would they find you?
You could find me in the Darker Studios Discord, generally posting memes and about genres. But today I'm probably going to post something about Blade just to be snarky, and people won't know what it means because they
Right,
haven't
because
heard these yet.
and they'll have no idea when we'll drop them. So.
What about you?
You can also find me in the Darker Hue Discord. You can also find me on Blue Sky at pugstudy.com. That's also my website. But if you like this stuff, definitely support the Darker Hue Patreon. That is part of the reason we're able to do this stuff. So definitely go and give Chris some of your sweet, sweet cash so he can continue to fund these fun conversations. And with that, we will talk to you next time with lucky number 13.